Greetings and welcome. We are at Senior English B. Our objective today is to exegete as well as we can T.S. Eliot's poem, The Hollow Men. Yesterday we began with a reading of this poem, and today now we will spend a little time trying to figure out exactly what is, for your notes again, T.S. Eliot's vision of modernity. That's a way to say it, and I recommend in your notes you put it that way. We will also point out that this is a fairly optimistic or pessimistic view of modernity. Well, look at the final lines. This is the way the world ends, not with a bang, but a whimper. So, I mean, yeah, it's a pretty pessimistic view, isn't it? Let's begin, though, now with these two little sayings at the top of the poem. Believe it or not, they actually have quite a bit to do with helping us understand the meaning of the poem. The first one is, Mr. Kurtz Hede. Now, where does this one come from? Well, for your notes, let's write it down. This one comes from a very famous novella. We don't really call it a novel because it ain't long enough. We don't call it a short story because it's too long. We call it a novella called Heart of Darkness. The author's name was Conrad, Joseph Conrad. Conrad tells the story of a guy named Marlowe who is sent into the inner heart of the continent of Africa to bring out this bad guy named Kurtz. Now, if you know any movies, you know maybe the film Apocalypse Now, Francis Ford Coppola's early offering. And it's kind of a modern retelling of this short novella called Heart of Darkness. Marlowe, on his way into the heart of the continent of Africa, has all kinds of images in his mind of what this Kurtz person must be like. When he finally arrives there, Kurtz is a pretty bad guy. Enemies of his, he's had their heads chopped off and stuck on top of posts that sit outside of his house, that kind of thing. He rules with an iron fist. But by the time Marlowe meets Kurtz, this strong, dynamic, violent man, underline that word in your notes, Kurtz is a very violent man, he's kind of withered away to nothing. And Marlowe, doing his job now, is going to try to get Kurtz back home, and on the road, Kurtz dies. Before Kurtz dies, however, he says something very famous. He says, the horror, and then he dies. Okay? And then a servant comes in to report, Mr. Kurtz, he dead. That's the actual quote. Well, what is this a reference to? It's reference to a man named Kurtz who defines his life through violent action. That you want to underline in your notes. Kurtz is a man who defines his life through violent action. He is a man committed to violent action. Okay? He does not sit around doing nothing. He definitely does things. It's just really violent things to try to succeed, to gain his purpose. Now, Mr. Rothleutner, I noticed, nodded when I mentioned V for Vendetta as a film that mentioned something about a guy named Guy Fawkes. Are we at all interested in understanding that one? Notice a penny for the old guy is the phrase here. Do I have any of you that saw this film, V for Vendetta, and therefore have some sense of what we're talking about here? Who is Guy Fawkes and what's he all about? Mr. Rothleutner?
Is it British Parliament? Or
yeah.
British Parliament.
You got it. Who was Guy Fawkes? He wanted to do what?
He wanted to, assassinate them by
right.
a bomb.
Let's solve all of our political problems by just blowing up every last one of them. They all meet in one place in Parliament. So let's put tons and tons of TNT right under the ground, put them all together, and then light the wick. We'll have all our problems solved, Guy Fawkes said. We'll blow every one of them to kingdom come, and then we won't have legislators that are, bad, etc., as he saw it. He got caught. Okay, he got caught. And on Guy Fawkes Day, you'll say a penny for the old guy in commemoration for Guy Fawkes, who was going to try and fight against political tyranny, as he saw it, through what? Violence. So now all of a sudden we can add to our notes two observations made. Notice Eliot very subtly will say this in these two little quotes. These are two little quotes celebrating what kind of man? A violent man, keep going. What else? Aggressive. They will have a certain agenda. They are definitely not people who sit back and wait for events to happen. Both Kurtz and Guy Fawkes, very much about making their own destiny, right or wrong, making their own destiny. Now, those two quotes sit at the beginning of a poem called The Hollow Men. Jot down really quickly what's already clearly paradoxical about mentioning Kurtz and mentioning Guy Fawkes, but then putting those two characters next to the name or the phrase hollow men. What's interesting about that? Is there anything you want to point out that's interesting about that? Both of these men, Guy Fawkes and Kurtz, are men filled with rage or empty of feeling. Guy Fawkes, he's going to blow up every legislator. What are your thoughts? Is he filled with rage about these legislatures, or is he fairly empty in terms of it doesn't matter to me? See where we're headed? All right. So T.S. Eliot's going to begin by juxtaposing Guy Fawkes and Kurtz as one kind of man, and then on the other hand, the modern man. Who is the modern man? Let's begin with our grammar, shall we? In grammar, we have, of course, these things we call pronouns. Remember? Pronouns will stand in place for the thing or the noun we're talking about. If, for example, I say to Mr. Brown, give me that, he knows I'm talking about something when I say that. He's just not sure what. So we have a rule. Before I use the pronoun that, we must provide what we call the antecedent, the thing I'm talking about. Nice water bottle, give me that. And then we all understand what we're talking about. We can talk about pronouns, though, as being related to people, too. Isn't he something? See, now, Cruz Nicholas knows I'm talking about a thing, a he, right? But which he? It's unclear. It's fuzzy. We have a rule. You always provide the antecedent before you actually use the pronoun. Take a look at the first word of this poem. We are the hollow men. We are the stuffed men. Notice this poem does not begin as maybe one of the romantics would have 100 years earlier. I am the hollow man. I am the stuffed man. We don't start there. Or, you are the hollow man. You are the stuffed man. Jot down in your notes, what's significant that T.S. Eliot begins with the pronoun we? We are the hollow men. We are the stuffed men. Notice he doesn't begin by saying, I am the hollow man. I am the stuffed man. He doesn't begin by saying, you are the hollow man. You are the stuffed man. Instead, he begins by saying, we are the hollow men. We are the stuffed men. What do you want to make of this? By the way, do you have a sense that Eliot is saying it's good or it's bad that we're hollow men? Good or bad? What's your sense of it? Really bad, right? Really bad. This is going to be a critique of modernity that is not optimistic. Yay, we're all a bunch of scarecrows. No. That's not going to be this poem. This poem is going to be rather, it's a bad thing. It's not a good thing. It's a bad thing. Why start with the pronoun we? As opposed to, I am the hollow man, or you are the hollow man. What do you think, Nelson? You want to take a stab at this one? Why?
It sets everybody on equal footing.
Nobody gets out of this poem. Let's write it down. Nobody gets out. It's not like you get to read this poem and go, yeah, you know what? T.S. Eliot's right about some people that I know. You missed it. You don't get to step outside this poem and say, yeah, there's other people that are like really empty and useless in their life. Notice, everyone gets included in this critique. Everyone, are you ready for this? Including Eliot. Even the poet himself will say, this is our condition for all of us. Not just for some of us, for all of us. And to that degree, this poem then immediately begins to become very controversial. Because right away, there isn't going to be a lot of hope in this poem. There isn't going to be a whole lot of, I can stand outside and see what you all are, and so I'm going to point it out to you so you can become better. That's not this poem. So we'll ultimately ask the question, why would Eliot write a poem where he says, we are all hollow, we are all stuffed? Let's jot down hollow and stuffed and try and figure out what he's saying. We are all hollow, we are all stuffed. Hollow in what way? Empty in what way? What do you think? Benita says soul, which is interesting. What do you mean by that? How can you have an empty soul? I think you're dead on. I think T.S. Eliot would applaud what you just said. But what does it mean to have an empty soul?
Like, you have no feeling.
Yeah.
No feeling. Good. Let's write that down. It's as if somehow feeling is gone, right? Somehow feeling is not so real. Well, then what's the next one? We are the stuffed. How can we be completely full? Full of what? Anger, hate, ourself. Say it out loud. Food, stuff full of cuisine. Good. Yeah, some of us are hungry on the morning. Yeah. So let's now try and figure out what Eliot is saying. He's going to argue that we are spiritually empty, but we're full of information. We're full of knowledge. We're full of experiences, but we lack any kind of spiritual understanding. We have no soul. We're empty. An easy way, Eliot would say this in another poem. We'll actually get to it later here. He will point out that already in the 20th century, more people are having sex than ever in the history of the world, but they seem to be enjoying it less. That's an interesting observation. It's like more of experiences are happening, but less feeling about it. It's like it begins to be, well, let's take a look at what his similes, comparisons are. Notice he continues with this scarecrow thing. Leaning together, headpiece filled with straw. We're like a bunch of what? Write it in your notes. We're about like a bunch of scarecrows in a field. Leaning together, headpiece filled with straw. Scarecrows are filled from a distance, they look real. Right? But when you get up close to them, they're not real anymore. They are unreal. They're stuffed, but they're empty. And then he uses an interesting word, this word alas. We don't really use this word very much now. The word alas means what? Well, I can give it to you this way. The word alas means this. If you heard your friend do this morning, for example, you ask your friend, how you doing? And your friend went like this. Jot down what that means if you heard somebody do that. That's alas. That's alas, by the way. What does that mean? Can you come up with adjectives to describe that?
Sigh.
Yeah, but what does it mean? You're right, it is a sigh. It's what we would call a sigh. But for example, if you asked Mr. Brown this morning, how are you doing? And all Brown said was, what would that mean to you? What would that convey? Would that convey that, yay, my day is going great? No. What would that mean? that kind of sighing like that. That is the word alas.
Darn, it's not going.
We might say a little depressed. We might say a little bit down. We might say a little bit upset. We might say a little bit bored. The French word is ennui. It's boring. Things are like, it's not much to... Empty, an empty feeling. Now look at the comparison using like or as. Alas, look at the adjectives. Our dried voices, when we notice the verbs, whisper together, are quiet and meaningless, as wind in dry grass, or rat's feet over broken glass in our dry cellar. He uses two similes we're going to want to put in our notes. He says, when we talk, if we talk, we don't talk. What's the verb he used? We only whisper if we ever have anything to say. But when we do whisper, it sounds like wind in dry grass. Now, I often will say to pals who ask me, who live outside of this place, how do you continue to live there and teach? And I say, well, there's several reasons why I remain, but one is that I can teach students there things that your students, for example, in New York or Los Angeles, cannot understand. Really? Give me one example. Well, the opening lines of The Hollow Man. Alas, our dried voices, when we whisper together, are quiet and meaningless as wind in dry grass. Are you ready for this? Eliot says if we ever get around to talking, it sounds like when you're sitting in the Badlands and the wind blows through that brush. That sound, that's what he says our communication is. Let's jot it in our notes. It's an interesting observation. He says we talk all the time and we say absolutely nothing. Whoa. I've had seniors that say, once we start unpacking this poem, it becomes an interesting criticism of Warland High and her students. This is what Eliot says. If in the last 3 months, for most of us, you were to simply hit the print key on every text that you sent and you received. Just hit the print key. 2 observations Eliot says about this. 1, you'd have to fill up the printer with paper a number of times. That's how much we've printed, or that's how much we've texted. But 2, if you really seriously sat down with your red pen and said, I'm going to circle or star every time something really important gets said.
So it would be like 2 or 3 stars?
We hear what he's saying. We speak millions and millions of words and say nothing. The comparison of the simile is, look at it, as wind in dry grass, or a more provocative simile, as rats' feet over broken glass in our dry cellar. This sound, that sound of rats' feet scraping across some glass in a cellar? That's the sound of when we, notice it isn't talk, we only whisper anyway, but when we talk, we've got nothing to say. I'm always reminded of when they drag me to those wretched holes that are those malls, especially the really expensive ones, where people are walking up and down. What I found interesting years ago, because I would go and sit somewhere and try and be left alone to get some reading done, but when I looked up, Mr. Keeley, I noticed people are carrying thousands and thousands of dollars of stuff inside of their bags, but when you look in their face, they have that look like there's not any joy at all. It's almost like they're zombies. Eliot will say, that's our modern condition. We're full of information, but we have no joy anymore. We're totally empty. We talk all the time, but we say nothing. The meaning of the words are kind of lost. Right? Like, for example, that guy who looked at his girl and said, she reported, he said, I love you. And she looked back at him and said, what does that mean? And he went, you know exactly what it means. And she says, no, I don't want to know what I want you to tell me what it means when you say that. Can you tell me? And he's like, why are you doing this? And she's like, you're using language. I want you to tell me what it means. Think about the ways, Eliot will say this, the ways in the modern condition we talk all the time. We say absolutely nothing. Why is it we say nothing? Because we have nothing to say. Scarecrows leaning together in a field, headpiece filled with straw. We've got nothing to say. We know lots. We can surf the net. We can play video games we could not write ourselves. We turn on light switches. We can't explain how they work. We are completely consumed with knowledge and technology, but we have nothing to say. We have nothing to do. We are painfully bored because we have nothing to do. The human condition. Then Eliot turns. By the way, notice, we're only 7 or 8 lines into a poem that runs for a while. So for those of you who say, dude, this is like painfully dark critique, we're only getting started. Look at the next little section. Shape without form. Can you have shape without form? Explain it to me if you can have shape without form. Shade without color.
Black and white.
Still color, right? Paralyzed, right? Paralyzed force. Gesture without motion. Can you make a gesture without... let's put it in your notes. These are all paradoxes. What we will call the paradox. 2 things that do not fit together. Shape without form, shade without color, paralyzed force, gesture without motion. None of these fit together. We will continue with this theme of the paradox all the way through this poem. And now, I hate to say this, but we're going to get to one of the most disturbing word pictures my seniors get to endure every year. They're like, I guess I didn't understand these lines, and now you explain them to me. It's like I wish I maybe hadn't heard your explanation. Let's look at it. Those who have crossed with direct eyes to death's other kingdom. Remember us, dash, if at all, dash. Not as lost violent souls, but only as the hollow men, the stuffed men. Hey, can you imagine, just for a second, if you could go back in time or bring your great-great-great-grandma here, and you sit down with your great-great-great-grandma and you say, you don't understand. Life for me today is like so stinking hard. It's like unbelievably difficult. I got like all these things I got to do, and I got all this terrible life that I have, and there's all this. Can you imagine, while you're saying this, the look your great-great-great-grandma would give to you as she looked right in your eyes and she says to you, wait a minute, you're telling me your life is difficult. Yeah, it's difficult. Dude, it's like sometimes even my cell doesn't work. For example, notice this morning, the internet didn't work and we can't even find out our grades. And she just looks back at you with eyes that we might say would be direct. And she looks right into your eyes and says to you, really? You're going to tell me about difficult. We're talking about your great-great-great-grandma. You're going to tell me? This is the woman who had to wash her clothes, if at all, by hand on a scrub board. This is the woman who gets up in the morning and goes outside to get some water out of a well because maybe no running water. This is the woman who can get sick and then dies because there's no penicillin. This is the woman who looks at you with direct eyes and says, really? Or at your generation and says, really? This is what you produce from the sacrifice of our generation? Really? Eliot says he pictures an afterlife where your great-great-great-grandma is watching. And when your eyes meet, you do this. I don't even want to look at you. And Eliot says, when you die, that's the first thing you get to see. On the other side. On the other side of the river, the first thing you get to see is your great-great-great-grandpa who looks at you and says, really? This is called the life you lived? You're 18 years into it. Really? And you're going to tell me it's hard? You're going to tell my generation all the stuff we did, and this is what you did with that? Immediately we think of those first 20 minutes of Saving Private Ryan, don't we? You're going to look into the eyes of those people and say, yeah, it's hard. Really? Go back and look at the lines now. Those who have crossed to death's other kingdom, those who have crossed with direct eyes to death's other kingdom, remember us. Do you see the dash? If at all, dash. It's like your great-great-great-grandpa is watching you, and all he has to say is, right? Notice, yeah, that's true. A lot of us probably no, that's the point of the first word of the poem. We are the hollow men. We are the stuffed men. The entire generation, all of us. If we go to the other side, the last thing we want to see are those direct eyes. If you remember us at all, he's speaking to the people on the other side. Remember us not as lost, violent souls. We think here of Kurtz and Guy Fawkes. We don't even have the courage to be lost, violent souls anymore. What are we? Hollow men. Stuffed men. Why is it that zombie films became so popular in the 20th century? T.S. Eliot says because they are the working metaphor. What is the difference between being a zombie and being you right now? The answer, Eliot says, is Almost nothing. So what? You have a pulse. What do you do with it? So what? You have a brain. What are you doing with it? So what? You have all this technology. What are you accomplishing with it? We are the hollow men. We are the stuffed men. I'm only through the first of 5 stanzas, or parts of this poem, by the way. Once you understand a little bit of where he's going, the second part's pretty easy. Eyes, here it is. I dare not meet in death's dream. I don't want to go there and see my great-great-grandpa. I've had students who actually say this out loud. I don't know a lot about who my great-great-grandpa was, but I guess I probably don't want to, right now anyway. I have not lived 18 years of a life well enough to be able to really say I'd like to look him right in the eyes. I'd see him and my eyes would do one of these numbers. Dude, I really don't have much to say right now to you. Right? Eyes I dare not meet in dreams in death's dream kingdom. These do not appear. There, the eyes are sunlight on a broken column. There is a tree swinging and voices are in the wind singing, more distant and more solemn than a fading star. On the other side of the river, they're having a good time because they at least lived a life. He says, I don't want to go there. I'm not in. Notice, let me be no nearer to death's dream kingdom. Dude, I do not. The reason he says I don't want to die is because I don't want to have to go to the other side and look him in the eyes. So I don't want to die. I mean, it's not like I'm really living. It's kind of like zombie state. But we don't want to die and go to the other side, because if we die and go to the other side, we got to look at our great-great-great-grandpa in the eyes. And he's going to say, really? This is what you... Think about it. Your great-great-great-grandpa, he didn't have an education like what you've got. No way, no how. No way, no how. Not even kind of close. And he's going to say, 12 years of education? This is who you are? After 12 years of... See, notice he says, let me be no nearer in death's dream kingdom. Let me also wear... Oh, we fake it. Isn't this interesting? Such deliberate disguises. Rat's coat, crow skin, cross staves in a field, behaving as the wind behaves, no nearer. And then he says it again. Dude, this is what I do not want. Not that final meaning in the twilight kingdom. I don't want to go there. No way. Then, now we shift. Part 3. I've got to hurry now for you. Part 3. You can appreciate this. Eliot says, you want a working picture of our existence? Just drive between here and Tinsley. And look at the desert. Look what he says. This is dead land. This is cactus land. Here the stone images are raised. Here they receive the supplication of a dead man's hand under the twinkle of a fading star. Let's just say, because we can do this at 3A now, this is Eliot's view of the loss of the sea of faith. Do you remember it? The sea of faith was once too at the full, and round earth's shore lay like the folds of a bright girdle furled, but now I only hear its long, withdrawing, melancholy roar. Who wrote those words? Do you remember? Matthew Arnold's poem, Dover Beach. Remember? He says there was a time when people actually believed in stuff. Notice here, it is the supplication or the prayer of a dead man's hand under the twinkle of a fading star. In other words, Eliot was ready to say about his generation, it's over. It's over. It's done. It's dead land. It's cactus land. There is no Garden of Eden anymore. It's been destroyed. Nobody believes in it anymore.
Attention teachers, Infinite Campus is up and running here.
And then the question is it like this in death's other kingdom? We know it's not, where your great-great-great-grandpa is, right? Waking alone at the hour when we are trembling with tenderness, lips that would kiss form prayers to broken stone. This is an amazing insight. Eliot says, we pray, but we really don't believe in it anymore, and therefore it's not real. So we find no hope from the prayer. We are totally alone. And the last thing we want to do is to go and look at our great-great-great-grandpa in the eye. That's the last thing we want. The eyes are not here, right? Great-great-great-grandpa's eyes not here. There are no eyes here in this valley of dying stars, in this hollow valley, this broken jaw of our... Notice what he calls the European powers, lost kingdoms. This is Eliot's view of what it's like to end the First World War. And he says, there are no winners when millions of people die. Then he uses a powerful word picture. You might want to put this in your notes at 3A. T.S. Eliot loved several major poets. One of them was Dante, the Italian poet. Dante wrote a famous poem called the Divine Comedy that's divided into 3 parts. Part 1 is called the Inferno, or Hell. Dante pictures what hell is like. It's something like this. You die. The minute you die, you wake up. You're standing completely naked on a beach. And in front of you are thousands and millions of other naked people. There's not even the slightest sense of any kind of sexual, yes, I get to see naked people, and here's why. 2 things assault your senses. The first, a horrific stench. A stench like you can't imagine the smell. And then secondly and worse, a sound. A really horrific screaming sound, like terrible, terrible anguish, pain, coming from millions and millions of throats simultaneously. And so your instinct is to push away the person in front of you, to push away. But in the split second that you've arrived, there's been a few thousand more that arrive right behind you, and they're in the same pushing, and so everyone's getting pushed. There's just a little bit of light, so you really can't see very well, but you can kind of see that there's a river somewhere up there, and on the other side of the river, hell officially begins for Dante. Now that's his word picture of hell. Eliot says that's what he felt like when he walked downtown New York or London. And in the poem Wasteland, he says, go to a city and watch how people walk and their eyes don't even look at each other. You're not supposed to look, by the way, that's true if you do go to New York. You're not supposed to look people in the eye and say good morning or hello to them. Something's wrong with you. You might be seen as, dangerous or something. So everybody just kind of walks. He says walking in downtown London or in New York is like being in a zombie movie. Everybody's just kind of, well, play this game. The bell's going to ring here in a second. When you leave this room, pay attention to what people look like in the hall and say, wow, look at their eyes. Look at their body shape. Look at the way they carry themselves. And tell me how different that is from the zombie film you watched last time. Right? Hello? Notice I phrased the question, though, in a way that I ask you to look at other people. Notice this poem says, oh, that it was that easy. We are the hollow men. We are the stuffed men. Nobody gets out of this poem alive. Notice in this last of meeting places, now you can understand this line. We grope together and avoid speech, gathered on the beach of the tumid river. That's Dante, right? Sightless unless the eyes reappear as the perpetual star multifoliate rose of death's twilight kingdom, the hope only of empty men, the idea of afterlife. Now, what is up with this? Here we go around the prickly pear, prickly pear. Well, of course, we're playing a child's game here, but notice he changes the language to make it more disturbing. Between the idea and the reality, you come up with an idea and then you actually do it. Between the motion and the act falls the shadow. And then there's these words, for thine is the kingdom. What are those words from? That's right, the Lord's Prayer. Notice at the end of the poem, our guy here knows the first words of the Lord's Prayer, but he can't finish it. It's like he knows the Lord's Prayer, but he can't come up with the rest of it. And then finally, this is the way the world ends. This is the way the world ends. This is the way the world ends. Not with a bang. We don't blow ourselves up. We don't even have the courage to do that, to be Guy Fawkes or Kurtz. But with a... that's it. And then civilization goes away. Question for your notes. Why write a poem like this if there's no hope in a poem like this? What is it that T.S. Eliot maybe is trying to do to high school students at Rowan High? Awaken you to something. Watch the halls now that you walk. Watch them and ask, is it true Worland High School students are predominantly hollow men? Stuffed but empty. And at what point will you begin to actually live your life? Or is that even possible in the 21st century? What an intriguing question. Maybe worthy of an hour of thought later. Thank you.